the cuts are almost certainly regressive. Now, I don't believe that they are going to hit the poor proportionately harder than the rich, for the reasons I said earlier, that the Treasury have essentially excluded from their tables many of the measures, important and big measures, not small things at the margins, that are going to hit the poor. But I think when we say that, we also have to be absolutely clear that the British tax and benefit system does an enormous job of redistributing from rich to poor. If you look at what happened before this spending review, we redistribute an enormous amount of money. This is what basically government does in Britain, from rich to poor. At the end of the whole process, we will still redistribute an enormous amount of money from rich to poor. It will just be slightly less. And I'm really surprised and slightly disappointed in the government that they don't just front up and say this. This is, broadly stand back. This is absolutely what's going on. We have a very redistributive tax and benefit system, and we will do afterwards, but it won't be as much. And the reason it can't be as much is really because public spending does generally go to people who need it. You can argue there's lots of bits and pieces, but in a very broad sense. So when you cut public spending, you are going to be taking it away from the poor, and it's very, very, very difficult to do anything other than make it progressive. So I'm not in some ways too surprised or shocked by the fact it's going to be regressive, because I think that's just inevitable about a consolidation process. It is just, there isn't really any other way, and we might have to front up to that. But the consequence will be that poverty and inequality are likely to rise. One of the big things that is clearly going to do this is the decision to link all benefits to the CPI inflation measure, which tends to be lower than the RPI inflation measure. So what that just does is it puts people who rely for their income on benefits, they're going to get lower uprating every year. And this is going to be a progressive, meaning they're going to fall below where most of the other people in society are. So this is going to be the longer term. I think the biggest measure is 5 billion by 2014-15, but as it continues, this is the same as Mrs. Thatcher's decision in 1980 to link the basic state pension to price indexation, not earnings indexation, is a very effective way of cutting money. You can do it for quite a long time, it's quite easy, but at some point you say, oh, the consequences of this are very bad, and this is why we're going back to earnings indexation in pensions, because it worked very well. I mean, it worked fantastically well in keeping the cost of British state pensions under control for 30 years. But we now are living with a different problem, that the adequacy of British state pensions has fallen well below what most people think is a reasonable level. Just finally, I want to say I wish the government could be a little bit more consistent in some of its arguments. Its argument for cutting child benefit from higher rate taxpayers was because they said it was wrong for poorer households to subsidise the rich. But then, as Peter in fact said, why are you then taking pension credit away from poorer pensioners to maintain the winter fuel payment to richer pensioners? Why are you taking education and maintenance allowance away from 16 to 19-year-olds from poor families in schools to continue paying child benefit to 16, 19-year-olds for all 16 to 19-year-olds, whether they have rich or poor parents? So we've got a load of inconsistencies around. You look at the child benefit change, there's a whole bunch of things, but really nasty things have been brought into the tax and benefit system at cliff edge. So if you're just below the higher rate taxpayer of £44,000, you get, let's say you've got 3 children, you get £2,500 of child benefit. Your employer gives you a pay rise to take you just over the edge, and you lose £2,500. And what you're going to do is you're going to say, actually, can I pay a little bit of that into my pension to keep my gross salary below the level? The Treasury in their documents yesterday have estimated that this is going to cost the Treasury £280 million of the £2.5 billion they hope to raise from this. Is people trying to avoid it by essentially either asking for pay cuts or doing things like putting money into pensions, which are just pure distortions of the tax system, which you don't want in a tax system. You want people to be essentially able to decide what they want to do about their pension savings based on what they think is right, not based on the fact there's some very silly thing in their tax and benefit system which means that they're better off doing one thing, and so they can't make the decisions they want to do. And equally on the child benefit change, the differential treatment of one earner and 2 earner couples is just extremely difficult and will create a lot of problems, so that the the two earner couple on 80,000, two times 40,000, still get their child benefit, but the one earner couple on 45,000 loses it. These things are the sort of things that make people really cross. The different treatment of similar income families, I think, make people more cross than the distribution from rich to poor, and whether that happens. I was really, really surprised they did that. I thought, well, if you are going to take away child benefit from higher rate taxpayers or richer families, well, there's two obvious ways you could do it. Either you abolish child benefit entirely and you increase the means tested support for children so that poor families don't lose anything, and then you taper that away as people get richer. You could have done that. Or if you just want the rich to bear a bigger burden, you just increase the high rate of income tax. But it's quite simple, up to 41%, you've raised exactly the same amount of money, very, very simply. And also, it's quite odd to say, why should a family who's got children take a cut, whereas a rich family without children doesn't? I mean, all these things are really rather odd. So just to sum up, I wish the government told it straight a bit more. We have got a big deficit. It does need to come down. That will hurt the poor and that will increase poverty. I think there's no easy way around that, and I think it'd be much better if they told it straight. And I just wish when they're doing the measures they do that they had a bit more consistency than they seem to have so far.